Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Hope y'all are doing well. We've got some exciting stuff coming on the channel pretty soon. I figured I'd start with that before we dive into our video today. And because it's kind of a chill period with the game right now and there haven't been any major changes, I've just been testing a lot of different decks and thinking about, what are some planeswalkers maybe I haven't, spent a lot of time on. I've been getting requests in our LGS Discord. So for those of you who are in there, if there's content that you'd love to see, I've got a little bit more time on my hands this week. So I'm just trying to put up some stuff that I'm having fun with, that people are requesting. And the three things that you can expect to see, within the next week or so are our tier list, which even if there aren't any major changes, this week, whether it's balance or otherwise, I'll probably throw it up there just as a nice roadmap for players. And I think people have really, appreciated that and really, especially coming in, fresh to the game, like having a bit of that roadmap. I love doing it. It really puts me to the test of like, do I really know these decks? Do I really know these matchups? And I think that's a big part of this game. So definitely have the tier list coming up. We're also going to be doing some deep dives like we are today. So a little spoiler there. That's what we're going to do for Chandra. And just because some people have asked, and feel free to request that in the comments or in our Discord. And if I can make it happen, I'd love to do it. And then the third thing is I made a alt account because I want to join the MTG LGS team, which is the Discord team that I'm a part of. And you know what? I was like, it's been a while since I started new. Like, I haven't put any money on this account, but I've had it since November, so I kind of have everything. And I kind of wanted to do a bit of a video series on Bronze to Mythic. I think people have done that before, but I haven't personally done that myself, and I thought it was like a kind of a nice little deviation from what I usually do on the channel. So that's something I'm excited to bring you, at least like one video a week on that journey. See if I can hit Mythic, potentially this month. I'm not really putting like a time frame on it because I don't really want to grind, if I'm not feeling up to it. So we'll see when I hit it, but I'll definitely take you guys along for the journey. So without further ado, let's get into our video for today, which is going to be a deep dive on Chandra. And there's a lot of reasons why I wanted to do Chandra in particular. I did have some requests. It is a planeswalker that I often want to return to as like just this very like clear and clean kind of design of you're trying to get your opponent's life total to 0. Chandra can do that, whether it's attacking, using haste creatures, using burn spells. And she's just a really good planeswalker to be good with because she is a go-to pick for a lot of people. So even though I've been grinding a lot with Garruk and then Nissa the season before that, I was like, let's definitely do a bit more work on Chandra and see where we land. So there's a build that I've really come to love, which is not the build that we'll take our first look at. And I'll kind of explain how I got there a bit and the card choices, but we definitely have to start with, as you can see at the bottom there, the Logan Classic. So Logan Thorne, who's done some really amazing content for the game, plays tons of different card games, just has a wealth of knowledge. This was roughly his build that he really popularized as like the go-to to climb. I have a couple editions here with Looting Lizard, if you haven't seen this card, and then Zozu. So that's not very budget friendly. So, you can slot in other cards like Treetop Lookout and things of that nature. And definitely you'll hit Mythic with this list. I wanted to find a list that I felt was good competing in Mythic right now. You have to be considering Garruk when you're building your decks. That is, in my opinion, although I haven't played against all that much Garruk in the last couple days, I think he is a bit of the like clear winner of the format right now, without any changes, and we'll see after that. So I think you want to be thinking about how you're going to beat Garruk. And although I think this list is still very efficient, very effective, right? You're playing some early one-drops, and then you're really trying to outmuscle at 2, and, use card advantage through Firecrafter, Looting Lizard potentially, on on 3 and 4, and then you've got a bunch of haste creatures with Firespout Elemental, Vicious Mongrel, Blitzing Minotaur, and your Raging Goblin. And I think those are all well and good. But I think that this kind of like almost like closer to mid-range Chandra is not exactly where we need to be. I don't think Firespout Elemental quite really does it anymore. And I think Vicious Mongrel I still like for the most part at 4 mana. And I think Cannoneer Tusker, while being, because I think this is an important point which speaks to the build that we're going to look at today. It's still a good stat stick, right? Meaning it's a 2 mana 4/3. It's just a lot of stats. But when we think about Garruk, right, and I said this in my Garruk deep dive video, you're going to be able to make all of your creatures 3 power baseline, right? So what is the utility of a 2 mana 4/3 when your opponent is consistently playing 1 mana 3 1s, 3 2s, 4 1s, 4 2s? It's not a lot. And so even though Cannoneer Tusker was one of the best 2-drops to be playing in this build, I think that there's a reason that we should move away from green and think about Black Splash as an option. Now, I still think this deck is great. You can still win with it. You can still climb with it probably in Mythic, and it's one of the best decks to climb into Mythic with because the games are quick, and it's a very clear plan, and it pressures your opponent quite a lot. But I think if I were going to show up to a tournament, like our Mythic League tournament at the end of the month, the build that I would want to show up is the one that I'm about to show you. Now, this build is a combination of stuff I've been thinking about for a while for Chandra, and then a little bit of feedback from teammates for MTG SS, just who are constantly building decks and thinking about different things. So it's a bit of Ingalls, who's a player that was splashing black, on our team, and myself. And so I'm just calling this Splash Black because that is the focus of the video today, is thinking about how to really get your list of 30 cards for Chandra down to a T for what you're seeing in the metagame of Spellslingers. So we're going to go through, obviously, in the sections like I did last time, of like 1-drops, 2-drops, 3-drops, late game, your land, and how these things are interacting. And along the way, I'm going to try and tell you why I made specific card choices between kind of the classic green version and what we're running today. So let's look at our 1-drop package starting out, right? We've got 2-headed Hellhound, and I will caveat this build with it's not super beginner friendly. It does have, quite a few epics in it. So that is not the easiest to build, but if you've got the resources to do it, I do think that this is a really competitive build. So 2-headed Hellhound, definitely an incredible card in Nahiri, but it's also still a fine card in Chandra. And being able to curve 2-headed Hellhound into Sword Cannoneer, almost always being able to curve your 1-drop into Sword Cannoneer is pretty good. You can just, if your opponent doesn't have a 1 or 2-drop, hit your opponent for 6 damage, right, with 2-headed Hellhound, because it's going to double, it'll become a 3/2, and deal 6 damage, all for an investment of 3 mana total, right, between 2-headed Hellhound and Sword Cannoneer, which to me is pretty good, and I'll talk a little bit more about this card in a little while. Shock, I went back and forth on, but I think Chandra is able to utilize this spell the best out of any planeswalker, because with the fact that you have Flame Shot in your deck, and it is this kind of mini one-sided board sweep that also burns your opponent, Shock really makes it so your opponent doesn't have many great ways of dodging Flame Shot. And the other reason I really like it right now is, especially in the more low-curve Garruk build that's running Consultant and Channeler of Might, if you're playing against a player who's played against Chandra a lot, when you play Channeler of Might as a 3/3, I would say 9 times out of 10, you're not supposed to put an axe on that and make it a 4/2. And the reason being is that a 3/3 is a lot more obnoxious for Chandra to deal with because it can't die to Shock. But if your opponent is playing Consultants, Markov Chosen, things like that, Shock is still just going to kill that creature and be pretty efficient for you. So I think Shock does deserve a spot in the list. Pouncing Lemur, not much to say here. It's 1 mana 3/2. Talk about sort of a stat stick, right? It just comes down and can smack your opponent for quite a lot. You don't have the option to block, but I still think that the card just does quite a bit of work. And being the 2 toughness is relevant. It does play around burn through, right? Or anything that can do X1. So you're going to make a decent trade, but hopefully you get 3 damage in for 1 mana. And that's a Lava Spike for those of you who know Magic the Gathering. And that's pretty much what Chandra wants to do. Raging Goblin, the best opener you can have is having a Raging Goblin. Why? Because it's 1 mana for 2/1 haste. You get to connect for 2 damage, presumably before your opponent's even played a creature. And paying 1 mana to deal 2 damage that keeps the body on the board, right? So it's almost like a shock if you think about it. Almost at baseline. But when you get like 4 to potentially 6 damage out of this card, it for 1 mana, or a little bit more if we count the Cannoneer, because it's a good curve to go Raging Goblin into Cannoneer, make him a 4/1. It just really, when you get more than 2 damage out of this card, it feels like you're getting away with something. And there are ways to do that in this deck. So that is our 1-drop package, and I will come back to why we're specifically choosing to run 6 1-drops. Because I think that is a decision that a lot of Chandra decks would not be making. You'd maybe have 2 to 4 1-drops. If you're green, you might be playing Channeler of Might, even with the bigger haste package at the end. But we'll kind of come back to that. Fire Elemental. I do think that this card's kind of interesting to talk about, because this was a card that for a bit I did not know if it was worth it. Because if you think about it, 2 mana for a 3/2 is not super impressive. And you could be running, let's say, like the Iguana, right? It's a 4/2 trampler for 2. It's better stats. It's going to get some guaranteed damage in there. It trades up better, like 4 toughness or 4 power is like an important break point, I would say, in the format. But the thing is with Fire Elemental, if you can enable it to attack, right, whether that's through Goblin Shortcutter or having a suite of removal, this is attacking for more, right, because it's hitting your opponent for 2 when it attacks, and then it's also dealing 3. So Fire Elemental for this specific build, I think, is worth it because of the other package that we're running. So on paper, I think the card is not that powerful, but I think with the right synergy, the right deck build, it can be really annoying for your opponent to deal with. Sword Cannoneer, not much to say. Excellent card for what you're trying to do. Making a creature become more problematic by giving it +2/+0 is extremely relevant. Sometimes it's just adding 2 more damage to your opponent's life total, and leaving behind a 2/2 body is totally fine. It's just a very efficient card for what you're trying to do with Chandra. Goblin Shortcutter is just such an amazing card. I've said it forever. I think it's just been a great card for Chandra specifically because you have cards like the Fire Elemental, right? So being able to go Fire Elemental, I'll shock your 1-drop and then play my Shortcutter, attack with my Fire Elemental, right? Shortcutter just enables some really key turns where a card that normally wouldn't be able to connect with your opponent's life total is able to do that. And I don't think a lot of players really consider this card when they're playing against Chandra. Like, I feel like a lot of times your opponent does get kind of baited into like, all right, well, I got to try and out-pressure you. And they're not necessarily thinking about, okay, what happens if my 1-drop gets shocked here and then they have a Shortcutter? Like, is there a way that I can play around that? And sometimes no, but also sometimes yes, but your opponent's maybe not thinking about it. Goblin Shortcutter, just an excellent card. It's really efficient and does what you need it to do. So with the rest of the 2 package, we're looking at our Black Splash here. And this is where we really have to make the splash worth it. And I think that it is. And I'll explain why. Takedown. Said this in prior videos. This was an excellent option for Chandra back in the Nissa meta because it kills your Jiraga Druid on the opposite side of the board. And Jiraga Druid was one of the most obnoxious things for Chandra to deal with, and being able to pay 2 mana to do that is incredible. If you think about Flame Shot, right, costs 4 mana to deal 3, you get to curve out by playing your 1-drop, killing their 3 toughness or 3 power creature, right? It has to be 3 power or lower, but like, so you kill their crabs, you kill their Channeler of Mights, you kill their, buffed up Cranial Consultant. You kill their Jiraga Druid on 3, right? Takedown, I just do think, is a very efficient card and worth the splash when we're running the rest of the package that we're running. So Takedown is another reason why Fire Elemental is better, because again, we have access to both Shock early and Takedown and Shortcutter essentially as removal spells, right? Goblin Shortcutter isn't technically that. But all of those things enable cards like Fire Elemental, Pouncing Lemur, and Two-Headed Hellhound to punch through when they normally might not be able to. So speaking of punching through, and I am going to compare this card as a 2-drop to Crows and Tusker, right? So Ragerunner, completely, worse stats, right? It's a 3-1 instead of a 4-3, which is a noticeable difference. But what does Ragerunner give us? So for those who have played Ingrath, you know that this card is an auto-include, and I would say with Ingrath, you learn about the power of this card, because it's giving you the 2 best modes for an aggressive deck. You can choose to give it haste when your opponent doesn't have a creature or doesn't have good blocks, and you can give it sneak when they do, right? So that's what I love about this card, right? It's modal, and it's giving you the best of both worlds. Whereas Crows and Tusker, you play it out as a 4-3, and all it can do, right, is, you could choose to attack or block with it. That is your choice there. But it's basically, it doesn't really do anything when it's like, oh, well, they've got a Channeler of Might on the board. They paid 1 mana for their 3-3. I played 2 mana for my 4-3. Oh, they have a Paincast Demon. Same scenario. Oh, they've got a 3-1 Cranial Consultant. Or, some other token creature that was generated that becomes 3 power. So I think Ragerunner is really worth it because it just does exactly what you need it to do. It's guaranteeing 3 damage with Sneak at baseline, right? Or, in an ideal world, you get to play this where you go, let's say you're going, potentially, like second, you go 1-drop, and then you go Ragerunner, kill your guy, attack for 3. So, I really think Ragerunner is worth it. I think when this card connects for 3 damage, paying 2 mana for that is not that great, but usually you can get more out of it. And when it connects for 6 damage, when it even just trades for a relevant creature by giving it haste, I just think that you're getting the best of both worlds with this card as a 2-drop, and it does make Chandra with this splash. I think it's worth it. I really feel like it's worth it to play this card right now. And then we come to a card that I think is just really scary for a lot of decks to deal with. Yeenoghu, Beast of Butchery. I don't know if that's how you pronounce his name, but that's how I say it. So it's a 2-2 haste trampler. When it comes into the battlefield, you sack your other creatures. It gets +2/+2 permanently, right? And so if this is on, you can't play this on a full board because it will replace something. So yeah, like the best you can do is make it a 10/10 on a board with 4 creatures. Why is Yeenoghu good? Right, so it's haste trample, and it's really easy to turn this into baseline of 4/4, but most times you can make it a 6/6 or an 8/8. It's just a huge creature, huge haste threat that they have to deal with, and up front, almost like Ball of Lightning, right, is going to connect for damage, except instead of Ball of Lightning, it sticks around, right? So what it's able to do is really, just so much work. And what's really important about the synergy in this deck with this card is the fact that we're running a 6 1-drops, means that, let's say our Goblin can't get through anymore, or our Lemur, or our Two-Headed Hellhound. When we draw Yeenoghu, we get to turn those kind of crappy 1-drops into a huge, huge body. And the other piece of synergy, because I haven't mentioned it yet, which was on purpose, I promise, is Emberspawn Crags, right? So what you can do is you can hold your Yeenoghu as you're developing the board. Maybe it doesn't make sense to trade off your 1-drops to Yeenoghu quite yet. And then you get a power spike when you have a turn where you get your 2 Emberspawn Emberlings, and you turn those into +4/+4 to your Yeenoghu. So you can even, if the Emberspawn Crags also are not going to punch through, you just get to turn them into a real threat. And I can't tell you how many times I've played a Yeenoghu like kind of out of nowhere with those Emberlings and my opponent really doesn't have any way to deal with it. Because what Chandra makes you do with how aggressive she is and the 5 damage at the start of the game is you almost always have to be trading off things, right? Like, you have to block their Minotaur. You have to, you know, maybe trade your 2x with their Raging Goblin. You're trying to stabilize. So what Yeenoghu does is says, okay, well, you've been trading resources with me this whole game. Now I'm going to turn my little crappy, 2 power, 1 power cards into a real threat that's going to kill whatever you have to block me with and probably get 2 attacks in. And I've even had opponents who are like, oh, I have to bounce Yeenoghu, and, I think I'm going to get ahead, and then my Emberling spawns go off, right? So it's not guaranteed, right? It's a 30% chance. And then when they do, they just kind of, I'm sure, groan on the other side of the screen and go, wow, they still have a 6/6, 8/8 Yeenoghu after I dealt with their Yeenoghu last turn. So I really think that this card is one of the best reasons to be playing black, and I just think that it's an angle that the deck really needs. It really needs a creature that can get really big and really beefy and connect for a significant amount of damage while also making your 1-drops that you draw potentially later in the game good, right? It just feeds the beast of the Butchery here. So I really can't talk this card up enough. I just think that it is really a huge headache for people to deal with. And into some of your most aggressive draws against like slower opponents, they're just going to lose to this card. They're going to look at it, it comes down, eats their best creature, deals damage, and they're like, great, now I have to deal with Flame Shot and Yeenoghu and Lava Axe, right? So that's our Black Splash. Take 2 takedowns, 2 Ragerunners, and a Yeenoghu. I could find another black card to play. I was thinking about playing the Prowler, the Silent Prowler, the 2/1 for 1. But I've actually just been really happy with this package, and part of the reason is I'm really happy with the rest of the deck. So that's what we'll move on to after that. So again, we are choosing to splash black here. I think Takedown, Ragerunner, and Yeenoghu are all really worth it. It does take a bit of time to optimize your combat, if you've never splashed black before, but I think you're going to see that this just ends up being a bit more effective than the kind of beefy green package that we're used to seeing. So, definitely moving on to the 3-drops here, I want to talk about Ghitu Archer. I used to see this actually in Domri lists, and I think occasionally I'd seen it in Chandra lists. And really why I even entertained this card is I was like, you know what? I feel like the 4-drop slot for Chandra is really clogged, and I want a 3-drop that does something other than my Minotaur. And Ghitu Archer, I remembered kind of seeing here and there, and I was like, oh, is that good enough? I'm not really sure. I actually have come to really like this card. And you might just be shaking your head immediately and saying, like, why is this good? It's a 3-mana 3/2, not a good rate. It's got reach. Who really cares? You're not blocking. You're playing Chandra. Deal 1 damage to an enemy. Does that really matter? And sort of how Shock is kind of the best enabled in Chandra, I think Ghitu Archer is as well. And I think we're in a particular place where, especially against the lower to the ground Garruk decks, there are lines where they're going to trade their Consultant's life down to 1 health, right? Or potentially a Channeler of Might, a Wolf and Wild Tracker, something like that, right? And I did a whole deep dive on Garruk, so I feel very comfortable saying that Ghitu Archer, while being not like a broken card, has some decent upside into Garruk. And what it allows you to do, like Shock, is, except you get a 3/2 body that's left behind, you get to put 1 damage where you need it to be, right? So whether it's you're softening up a target with a Raging Goblin, and then you play your Archer to do the last damage, because people are not really thinking about this. And what's a really cool outplay that you can do with this card is you can play it even if you don't have Flame Shot in your hand, right? Or like you're making blocks, like you've got a Flame Shot. I think this is a better example. So imagine your opponent is coming at you, you block with like your Raging Goblin on an X3, and you block with like your Minotaur on like an X5, right? They might say, okay, you know what? I've attacked, I wanted to see how they would block. I'm not going to play another creature that can die to Flame Shot, or I'm not going to commit anything more to the board than I need to. And then, even when you don't have Flame Shot, you just get to slam your Archer, kill their creature, their best creature with 1 toughness, and they're like, oh, they didn't have Flame Shot. Okay, I could have kept developing, but I chose not to. Does that scenario come up that often? No. But there were literally games that I played today where that's exactly what happened. My opponent put me on having a Flame Shot in my hand. Instead, I had to get to Archer, and I ended up getting ahead because my opponent didn't want to commit more to the board. So there is that interesting interaction. But I think get to Archer, try it, right? Always take my words with a grain of salt. You got to go and see what works for you. But I've actually been incredibly pleased with this card. And even in the mirror matchup, right, against another Chandra deck, Ghitu Archer does, some decent work, right? Whether it's picking off a Raging Goblin, softening up a target for Flame Shot or Shock. I just think that the 1 damage is actually doing a lot more work than you think. And there are some edge cases where reach is actually relevant, right? Thinking about having a card that technically answers Drana. I was struggling to think of the name. But Drana's a 3-mana 2/3, right? Garrick wants to put an axe on it and attack through. Ghitu Archer actually blocks it. So there's a little bit more upside to this card than you think, at least for the meta that we're in right now. And I do think that it's a really old, not super exciting card. And I do think it's a really old, kind of like not super exciting card, but it has a lot more upside than you might think at first sight. So give it a shot. Get it? Because he's an archer. Okay, Blitzing Minotaur. Nothing to say here. Obviously should be in the deck. 4/3 haste. It's such a headache when even when you're playing Garrick. I'll have a quick aside. A lot of times you don't want to make your creature 2 toughness, right? You do want to play around Shock. You want to have as much flexibility potentially around Flame Shot, cleaning up the rest of your board. So there have been some times where I actually have a creature that doesn't, I really want to keep the toughness high, and then I kind of get punished because they get to play a Blitzing Minotaur anyway, and I have to block. So, it's nothing crazy, but I think sometimes Blitzing Minotaur is just a really annoying card for your opponent to deal with. Okay, Tim, why are you playing 1 Chandra's Firecrafter? I will give you an answer. Chandra's Firecrafter, although it is a 3-mana 3/3, nothing exciting there, that gives you a card, which is decent. I don't think you want 2 of this card. I think 1 is perfect. Whenever I draw it, I'm like relatively happy, and I just never really care. I'm never like, oh man, I wish I had another one, because the spells are random. You're just getting kind of like a freebie that hopefully you can use. It does have that X factor of like your opponent doesn't know what you get, which is kind of like Teferi when he uses his staff. You're like, well, I don't know what traps to play around. Like, I hope I don't, get hosed by something. I think that Firecrafter deserves 1 slot in the deck. I think it's good enough to be there. If we were maybe in a meta, I guess maybe a little bit more towards control, maybe having a second Firecrafter would be better because you just want more card advantage, like kind of raw card advantage. You don't really care about the fact that you're paying 3 mana for a 3/3, whereas Channeler of Might and Pain-Cast Demon cost 1. I think that it's still just good enough to play as a 1-of, and I've been really happy with just 1 of the card. Nothing to say here. Card's excellent. I mean, I think the one thing I will say is that having Shock and Ghitu Archer makes your Flame Shots even more juicy. Like, it's so hard for your opponent to play against this in certain spots. And the fact that you get to soften up other targets with Shock and Ghitu Archer makes it even harder. So every opening hand I have this card, I'm pretty much keeping it in a creature matchup. It's just, you get to set it up. And yes, your opponents can, quote, play around it. But also, like I said, with Ghitu Archer, sometimes it does a good Flame Shot impression when your opponent's trying to play around Flame Shot. So, just a couple notes there. Okay. Looting Lizard. I don't think this comes as a surprise to anyone that this card is, worth even 2 slots here. And I have gone back and forth on do I want 1, do I want 2, but I think in a world where, I said this in my Garrick video, like the deck just has access to like crazy amounts of card advantage, and it's also pressuring you. That's kind of what I want to do with Chandra. I want to be able to play all my 1s, my 2s, my Yeenoghus, training resources, doing all of that, and then on like turn 5, 6, 7, I do want to play my Looting Lizard and refill my hand. Being able to dig 3 cards deep to make sure I hit my Lava Axe to close out the game, I think is a really important thing. Now, drawing 2 in a game could be pretty awkward, right? That's why I had considered, oh, maybe I should only be playing 1. But I actually think you want to play 2 for a couple reasons. A 4-4 for 4, although it's nothing crazy stat-wise, 4-4 for 4 is fine. In this deck, having that late game, you know, that potentially is a good blocker for you. And the fact that you're upping your chances by having 2 in the deck to be able to play it and draw those 3 cards and dig 3 deeper to the burn that you need to close out the game, I think it's good enough. I really do think that every time I've had Looting Lizard, and I hope to never have it in my opening hand because it's never coming down on turn 4, especially with stuff like Emberspawn Crag in your deck. I think that he kind of is this hidden like 6 or 7 drop, but the trick is, even though you're playing him late, you're then hoping to rip like your shock, your haste creature, maybe your takedown, something else. So it's not like you're just paying 7 mana for this effect. You're paying 4 mana up front, and then hopefully hitting something that you can cast right afterward. And you just get to craft your game plan around, like, you're trading all these resources, you and your opponent are maybe getting lower on cards, and then you get to slam a Looting Lizard, and I promise your opponent is not going to be happy that when they're fighting to keep their health above 10, you're getting to play a Looting Lizard, which draws you 3 cards. So, again, maybe not the easiest to craft with all these epics in this deck, but I think that Looting Lizard is just needed right now. You need to have card advantage, and having draw 3 on a 4-4 for 4 mana is definitely, I think, a place where I want to be. Now, Lava Axe may seem like an auto-include, but I want to enter in, another card choice, right, which is Hellrider. My friend Karma, who I've worked on videos with and very active in all the MTG Spellslinger Discords and all of that, he was like, well, why aren't you running Hellrider? Now, Hellrider is 5 mana for a 4-3 haste. Deals 1 damage for each attacking creature that turn. It's never living, right? It's always going to get 1 shot off, and it's a 4-3 body. So there is an upside, right? In an ideal world, in the best case scenario, you've got 5 creatures, you Lava Axe them, and then you get to trade a 4-3 body into whatever. The thing is, I'm not really convinced at this point that with all of the removal and the efficiencies of Garrick, that you can really safely say that Hellrider is going to be worth it for you when you're just trying to deal 5 to their face. Like, that is the ideal scenario. So why not just play Lava Axe, right? I'm not really worried about negate. I'm not really worried about, spells that counter a spell. I think I would just rather have my 5 mana deal 5 and have 2 of those in my deck to close out the game. So, although Lava Axe, I think for a lot of people, is not going to come as a surprise that it's in this deck, I do think that you can make different choices, and sometimes Lava Axe is not as good, right? Obviously, if we're playing in a Teferi meta, we're playing in a Jace meta, an Ashiok meta, Lava Axe can be bad, right? Because you can disrupt it, whereas Hellrider maybe not so much. But I prefer Lava Axe because I'm telling you, when you get familiar with this deck, it's so easy to get your opponent sub 10 life, and it's usually like you're playing out that Lava Axe and just trying to get that last 3-4 damage in. And I think Lava Axe really makes the difference, and I think it is a better choice than Hellrider right now because of how efficient Garrick is, because that's the deck I have to be considering when I'm building this deck, and I think that all of the card choices in here I've become really, really happy with, and I've probably played a little over 20 games over the last few days. Started off a little rough as I was tweaking things, but I've really come to love this list. And for those who are bored and are Chandra fans, like, if you have not Splash Black and tried this build, I think you should, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. It just has a lot of angles between Yeenoghu, the amount of haste creatures that you have, especially with the addition of Ragerunner, Takedown as like a very efficient removal spell, and all the other options you have, and kind of the tech of this Ghitu Archer, I think you might actually find that this deck is one of the more competitive Chandra builds. Right now I'm sitting at 18 or 20 on the Mythic ladder. I think there's roughly, we're probably getting close to like 100 Mythic players at this point. So, and I've just generally been climbing with the deck. After a couple bumps, when I first was tweaking things, I just feel very good about where the build has landed. So, that is our deep dive on Chandra. I really appreciate y'all coming through. I'm going to put obviously the deck code below. Ooh, I hit 14. Nice. So I guess some people lost. Thank you so much for joining. Please feel free to request other deep dives. I feel like this is a great way for me to get to know decks that I haven't really spent as much time with, and really test like my ability to figure out what is the most optimal strategy for each planeswalker given the current metagame. So as always, please like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, we've got some really fun stuff coming up, and I will see you all then.